Imagine this. You're a successful black woman, the CEO of a global airline. You've earned your seat, your respect, your peace. But the moment you step onto a flight, a white passenger looks at you, smirks, and says, "That can't be your seat." In that instant, the world goes silent. Every eye turns. What would you do? Would you fight back? Would you walk away? Or would you choose something deeper? The kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. This isn't just a story about a stolen seat. It's about a stolen moment and how one woman decided to reclaim it with grace, not anger. It's about what happens when dignity meets ignorance and wins. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of defiance isn't raising your voice. It's keeping your heart steady. So, ask yourself, if you were in her place, surrounded by judgment and prejudice, would you have stayed calm? Would you have found compassion in the middle of humiliation? Tonight, we'll tell you the story of Olivia Harper, the woman who faced prejudice at 35,000 feet and landed not just a plane, but a message that shook the world. Before we begin, take a second, like, share, and subscribe, because this isn't just a story you'll hear, it's a story you'll feel. Olivia Harper walked confidently but lightly through the first-class doors of the 5-hour flight from New York to Los Angeles. She held her dark brown leather handbag slung over her shoulder as her eyes scanned the spacious seats and soft lighting of the cabin. The scent of coffee wafted from a nearby counter, mixed with the fresh scent of the leather seats, creating a luxurious yet homey feel. Olivia breathed lightly, trying to regain her composure after a tense meeting that had lasted nearly 6 hours at Skyward Airlines headquarters. As she approached Seat 1C, which had been reserved for weeks, a sharp sound came from behind, making Olivia jump slightly. "I need both of these seats to sleep comfortably," a middle-aged man's voice, deep and sharp, cut through the silence. He casually spread a large gray blanket over 2 adjacent seats, as if the first-class cabin belonged to him alone. Olivia frowned, calmly turning back. The man standing there was Richard Morgan, in his early 50s, neatly dressed, his eyes full of confidence and disdain. His smug smile made the surrounding passengers shiver. Olivia gently lifted her boarding pass, her voice gentle but firm. "Seat 1C is mine. I booked it in advance, and here's my ticket." Richard Morgan just glanced at him disdainfully and then sneered. "You must be mistaken. People like you shouldn't be sitting here. Go find somewhere else," he said, his words full of arrogance and discrimination. Inside Olivia, a storm of emotions was brewing: anger, helplessness. But she took a deep breath to calm herself. This was not the first time she had faced prejudice since her early days in aviation. Olivia had learned to stand firm without letting anger dictate her decisions. For a moment, she remembered what her father had said: "True strength is not in making others submit, but in being yourself in any situation." The surrounding passengers began to look in their direction. Some pulled out their phones, the screens flashing, recording the tense moment. The normally quiet cabin was filled with the sounds of attention, whispers, and curious glances. Olivia could feel the pressure from her surroundings, but she remained steadfast, her eyes deep and calm. Richard Morgan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his expression confident. He was the kind of man who had the world revolved around him, never been rejected or challenged. Olivia Harper realized that this was more than just a simple fight for a seat. This was a battle of wills, a test of dignity and power. She knew that if she gave in now, She would be a failure not only for herself, but also for the values she represented. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the other passengers, noticing the silent sympathy in some of their eyes. An elderly man sat in the row next to her, his hands clenched, seemingly saying to himself, "This is unacceptable." Olivia realized she was not alone, but she also knew that every decision she made next would determine how this conflict would play out. In the quiet moments before things explode, Olivia reminds herself of the power of patience. Sometimes the strongest thing is not to scream or argue, but to stand firm and choose the right moment to act, she tells herself. Richard Morgan sneered again, his eyes challenging. "You don't understand. This is first class. I paid for this space, for comfort. I don't need to be lectured," he said, his voice hard and defiant. Olivia Harper quietly placed her hands on the seat, looking him straight in the eye. In her silence, she conveyed a clear message she would not yield, but she would not act without restraint either. Other passengers began scrolling through their phones, the flickering lights on the screens recording the tense moments. No one dared to intervene directly, but the atmosphere in the cabin was now heavy with anticipation, curiosity, and quiet anger. Olivia knew her actions would be closely watched, and she needed to be precise in her every gesture, every word. She took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and walked to seat 1C, bracing herself for the next confrontation. A strange feeling had just emerged inside her, anger balanced by mental strength. Olivia Harper knew she was facing a moment that would test both her wit and her dignity, and she was ready to face it. Olivia Harper stood in front of seat 1C, her eyes fixed on Richard Morgan, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. This was no time to be quiet or shy. This was a moment to stand her ground. This seat was hers, and she would not give it up. She lifted her boarding pass slightly, the screen light illuminating her serious but calm face. Richard sneered, a smile that froze the air around him. He placed his hand on the chair next to Olivia, possessive, his eyes challenging. "I paid for this seat," he thought. But Olivia was different. She didn't need to scream or threaten. Her strength lay in composure and preparation. He leaned in, smirking, his voice floating in the first-class air. "People like you don't belong here. People like her shouldn't be sitting here." Olivia felt the anger rising in her, but she took a deep breath, calming her heart. She knew that if she lost control, things would go too far and affect her and the image of the airline. The surrounding passengers began scrolling through their phones, the flickering lights on the screens reflecting the tension in the cabin. No one dared to speak, but everyone watched. Olivia could sense the silent support in some of their eyes. She sensed the hidden strength of this community of passengers, but she also knew that one small mistake could ruin it all. Richard Morgan tilted his head, his eyes searching her as if testing her. "I'm used to people listening to me," he thought. "I've never been refused or challenged." But Olivia was different. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the CEO of this airline, someone who understood her power and how to use it wisely. Olivia spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Excuse me, seat 1C is mine. I booked it. Here's my boarding pass." She held up her card, the screen light illuminating her stern face. Richard Morgan still didn't look at her. He crossed his arms, smirking. She didn't understand the meaning of equality. She only saw herself as a victim. Some passengers dialed their phones faster, the screens flickering. The air in the cabin became stifling, heavy with pent-up tension. Olivia Harper could feel the scrutiny of those around her, and she knew that her every move, her every word, could have an effect. In a moment of silence, Olivia recalled her upbringing in a middle-class Atlanta family, where she learned to confront prejudice and people who believed that power and money could control everything. Those memories surged like a silent current, reminding her of her inner strength, of why she stood as CEO of Skyward Airlines today. Richard Morgan smirked, his eyes full of pride. "I'm used to people listening to me," he thought. "I've never had to be accountable to anyone." But Olivia Harper stood before him, calm, her eyes deep, making him feel a real challenge for the first time. This wasn't a game of money or fame. It was a battle of dignity and character. Olivia took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and walked to seat 1C, her eyes never leaving Richard. She knew that she couldn't act rashly. She needed to read the situation, observe his reactions and the reactions of the passengers around her. Everything had to be precise. One wrong move, and everything would be reversed. Richard Morgan finally spoke, his voice firm but confident. "I paid to be comfortable, not to be disturbed. You cannot disturb me." Olivia Harper looked him straight in the eye, her voice soft but powerful. "I am not bothering anyone. I'm just asking for my rights to be respected. This is my seat." The surrounding passengers began to murmur, their eyes darting, sometimes lingering on Olivia's face, sometimes on Richard's. Some were fiddling with their phones, the flickering lights creating their own tense rhythm in the cabin. Olivia felt the force of the collective gaze. She stood there, calm but heavy. Richard Morgan frowned, not understanding why this time. She was not afraid, not avoiding. He was used to power and money creating fear in people. But Olivia Harper was not an ordinary person. She had experienced thousands of confrontations, knew how to control her emotions and use them as mental weapons. A few passengers stepped back slightly, their eyes following her every move. Olivia knew her patience was being tested, and with each passing second, the tension in the cabin grew. She watched quietly, taking deep breaths, slowing her heartbeat, and keeping all her senses focused. All eyes were on her, and she knew that how she handled this situation would have a lasting effect. Not just on Richard, but on the entire first-class cabin. Richard Morgan sighed, his eyes scanning the other passengers, then returning to Olivia. He had never met anyone like her, someone whose power was not measured by money or privilege, but by calmness, composure, and the ability to hold her own. Olivia Harper stood there, her eyes bright, her gaze deep, making Richard Morgan feel a real challenge for the first time. The moment lingered, but Olivia knew the decisive moment was coming. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on Richard, her voice soft but audible. "I am not seeking to bring you down. I'm simply asking for my rights to be respected." This is the moment when dignity and justice begin to confront power and pride. The other passengers remained silent, but their eyes were clearly watching, some of them turning their phones faster, lights flashing. Olivia Harper knew she was fighting not just for herself, but for the values she represented. This was the decisive moment, and she was ready to face Richard Morgan without fear. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin suddenly became so heavy that every little sound echoed. The hum of the air conditioner, the slight flipping of the leather seats, and even the clatter of a pair of glasses falling to the floor startled everyone. Olivia Harper stood there, her eyes fixed on Richard Morgan, but she felt a vague sense of pressure around her. She knew that all the passengers were watching her every move, every word, every breath. A few people gently picked up their phones and filmed the confrontation. The flickering light from the phone screen illuminated Richard Morgan's tense face, revealing his surprise and discomfort. Olivia watched, feeling her heartbeat more steady than Richard's rapid heartbeat. This was the first time in his life he had seen someone who was not subdued by power or money. Richard Morgan sneered, but this time there was something different. His eyes were searching, as if he were weighing whether he could gain the upper hand this time. "I'm used to people listening to me," he thought, but Olivia Harper was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She didn't panic. She didn't give in. She just stood there, calm, confident, her eyes deep, looking straight at him. Olivia repeated softly but sharply, "Seat 1C is mine. I booked it, and this is my ticket. No one has the right to take it away from me." Richard Morgan shrugged, his eyes still arrogant. "I paid to sit here. I deserve this space. She doesn't understand equal rights." The surrounding passengers began to whisper, some secretly playing with their phones. No one spoke directly, but the collective pressure clearly made the atmosphere tense. Olivia realized this and took a deep breath. She knew that everyone's attention was an invisible ally. If she acted carefully, every glance, every phone would become a testament to her determination. Richard Morgan put his hands on his chair, his eyes challenging. "I have never been refused or challenged before. Everyone must listen to me," he thought. But Olivia Harper stood there, calm, her eyes deep, giving him the first real sense of challenge. This was no longer about chairs. This was about dignity, and spiritual power. A few passengers stepped back slightly, their eyes sparkling with sympathy. Olivia sensed the subtle change in the atmosphere. The looks said nothing, but the message was clear. "We see you. We support you." And in that moment, Olivia knew she was not alone. Another thought also rose in her mind. How many times in her life had she faced other Richard Morgans? How many times had she had to keep quiet to keep the peace? How many times had she had to endure just to prove her worth? Olivia felt a deep sympathy for those who had been looked down upon, who had been denied opportunities simply because of their skin color, gender, or circumstances. This was not just her battle, but also a symbol of the values she believed in. Richard Morgan leaned over, his voice contemptuous. "People like you don't understand what real power is." Olivia Harper took a deep breath, her voice soft but sharp. "I don't need to prove my power by forcing others to submit. True power is holding your own and respecting others." The surrounding passengers remained silent, but the collective pressure was obvious. A glance from a middle-aged woman from the back seat made Richard Morgan flinch. Olivia noticed that moment and felt a part of victory was present. Not a victory of violence or shouting, but a victory of dignity and determination. Richard Morgan began to feel uneasy. He'd never faced anyone like Olivia Harper. There was no sound of the outside world to protect him. All the power and money meant nothing in first class. Olivia stood there, calm, a pillar of stability in a sea of people waiting for the result. A few passengers couldn't help but mutter, "He's too much. We won't let this continue." Olivia heard and kept her composure, not showing it. She knew that power sometimes comes from silence, from patience. Richard's every move was being watched and recorded. Richard Morgan sighed, his eyes moving from passenger to passenger, Then back to Olivia. He had never seen someone like her, someone whose power came not from money or privilege, but from calmness, observation, and mental fortitude. Olivia stood there, motionless, just watching, a mirror reflecting all the arrogance and privilege Richard carried. The seconds ticked by, the tension mounting. Olivia knew the decisive moment was coming. She had to prepare for her next move. Every breath, every look, every gesture was carefully considered. She was ready to confront Richard Morgan, not with anger or violence, but with strength of mind and intellect. The first-class cabin was so quiet that Olivia could hear her heart pounding. Richard Morgan's eyes were challenging, but this time there was something fragile, as if he realized that this was no ordinary fight. Olivia Harper stood there, calm, composed, her eyes deep, and in that moment, the audience, the passengers, and Richard himself all realized one thing: Olivia Harper was not someone to be trifled with. The first-class cabin fell silent, a silence as heavy and taut as a broken string. The soft light from the ceiling lamps fell on Olivia Harper's face, making her look like a calm candle in a storm. Every passenger felt the unease. From the back of the cabin, a young woman in a Navy uniform approached, her smile professional, but her eyes slightly worried. It was Emily Clark, the flight's chief flight attendant. Emily had been in the industry for over 8 years, and she recognized that this situation was unlike any other seat dispute she had encountered before. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, but still professional. "We have to follow the seating chart. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to check your ticket." Richard Morgan didn't even look at me, just waved his hand. "I told you, I need both of these chairs to rest. I have health problems and I don't want to repeat myself." His voice was sharp and hard. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew this type of passenger well: rich, arrogant, and convinced that money could buy anything. But she also knew who Olivia Harper was. Every employee at Skyward Airlines knew the respected CEO. Olivia remained calm. She looked at Emily and nodded slightly, as if to signal that there was no need to worry, but her eyes also said that this time Olivia would not back down. "Sir," Emily said, trying to keep her voice light, "we have to be fair to all passengers. Mrs. Harper reserved this seat." Richard turned, his eyes burning. "Fair. Do you know who I am? I've been an investor in more airlines than you've been in business for. I don't need anyone to teach me about fairness." The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. A few passengers held their breaths. Emily swallowed, trying to keep her composure. Olivia sensed the young stewardess's confusion and took a step forward. "Emily." Olivia's voice was soft. "Thank you. I'll take care of it." Richard smirked, as if victory was in his grasp. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking smug. But Olivia was unmoved. She looked straight at him, her eyes no longer filled with anger, but with a cold calm that made the other party wary. "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice even and slow. "If you really need space to rest for health reasons, the airline can accommodate you by moving you to a more suitable seat, but taking someone else's seat is never the solution." Richard laughed, his dry laughter echoing in the stuffy air. "Are you lecturing me? Who are you to dare?" A passenger in the back seat blurted out. "She's Olivia Harper, the CEO of this airline." The sound was like a small bomb. The cabin fell silent. Richard Morgan froze for a few seconds. Emily froze, her eyes shifting from Olivia to Richard. The other passengers began to murmur, their phones raised even higher. Richard blinked, then tried to regain his composure. CEO? He grinned. So what? That doesn't change anything. I still have the right to expect the best service. I pay for it. Olivia remained calm. The best service, she replied, has never meant taking away another person's respect. Her voice was not loud, but it reverberated clearly, so that everyone in the cabin could hear it. A few passengers nodded slightly. A middle-aged woman whispered to the person next to her. "She's right." Richard began to feel frustrated. He looked around for support, but everyone looked away. No one was on his side. The feeling of isolation began to tighten his chest, making it difficult to breathe. Emily noticed the change and decided to intervene again. "Mr. Morgan, if you continue to cause trouble, I will be forced to notify ground security when I land." Richard turned around, his eyes full of anger. "You dare! You think you have the right!" Olivia placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, her voice calm. "Thank you. Emily, I think Mr. Morgan just needs some time to think." Richard gripped the arms of his chair, his face red with anger and shame. He turned to the window, trying to appear nonchalant, but everyone could see his hands shaking slightly. His anger was no longer about the seat, but about being publicly challenged for the first time in his life. Olivia sat down in seat 1C and leisurely buckled her seatbelt. No victory was declared, but the whole cabin knew who the real winner was. A few passengers clapped softly in silent recognition. Emily smiled slightly and left to continue her work, still haunted by the memory of the moment. Richard Morgan closed his eyes, trying to calm himself, but Olivia's voice kept ringing in his head. The best service never meant taking away someone's respect. As the plane began to taxi onto the runway, Olivia leaned back slightly, her eyes looking out the window. The afternoon light reflected on the glass, creating a warm, golden glow. She knew this story was not over. There was something in Richard's eyes that suggested he would not accept this defeat easily. As for her, she does not seek victory. She only wants to maintain one thing, that no matter what the circumstances, people must be respected. And that is what she is, and will always protect. The plane taxied smoothly onto the runway, the low hum of the engine playing steadily. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin returned to normal, but beneath the silence, two souls were still in turmoil. Olivia Harper sat upright, her eyes fixed on the window, but her mind was still filled with the confrontation. She had no regrets, but the heavy feeling in her chest did not go away. She knew she had done the right thing, but mental fatigue crept into her with every breath. A small voice inside her said, "Why do things like this still happen? When will people truly look at each other with respect?" Richard Morgan sat silently, his face tense, his eyes staring outside. He was a jumble of emotions, anger, shame, and a strange feeling he didn't want to admit fear. For the first time in years, he couldn't use money or position to win, and the one who had to win was a black woman. He gripped the armrest tightly, feeling his heart beat faster. He didn't want to think about what had just happened, but the sound of Olivia's voice still echoed in his mind like a song that wouldn't stop. True strength is being able to hold yourself and respect others. The words annoyed him. He had been taught that the world was not for the weak. Richard had grown up in an environment where power was everything. His father had always said, "You don't need to be loved, you just need to be feared." And he had lived by that saying all his life. But when he looked at Olivia Harper, the woman who sat calmly beside him, he saw something else. Her power didn't come from status or money, but from something deeper, more real. The first-class cabin was now filled with the steady hum of the engines. A stewardess walked gently past, adjusting the blanket of a sleeping passenger. No one spoke, but everyone seemed to remember the scene clearly. Everyone had their own thoughts, but they all felt that they had just witnessed something memorable. Olivia looked out the window, the warm golden light of late afternoon illuminating her face. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that kindness was never a weakness. You can win anything, but if you lose your character, you lose everything. Her words were whispered in the wind. She smiled, feeling a little lighter. As for Richard, inside him was a real storm. He tried to reassure himself that he was right, that he was only defending his own interests. But the more he thought about it, the emptier he felt. The way everyone looked at him just now, the disappointment, the contempt, and even the pity, made him feel like a real loser. A glass of red wine was placed in front of Olivia. Emily Clark, the young stewardess, said softly, "We apologize for the inconvenience. Mrs. Harper." Olivia nodded slightly, responding with a friendly smile. "It's okay. Emily, thank you for handling it so well." Emily smiled slightly, her eyes shining with genuine respect. As she left, she glanced at Richard Morgan. He avoided her gaze, feeling a pang of shame. Olivia raised her glass, watching the red glow in the pale yellow light. She swirled it gently, then set it down on the table, her eyes darkening. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about herself, but about people like her. People who had to endure judgmental looks, disrespectful words, invisible barriers every day just because they were different. She understood that sometimes a small action like today could create a bigger change than she thought. Richard tilted his head to look at her, but when he caught Olivia's eye, he quickly looked away. He didn't know why he felt this way, a strange mixture of shame and admiration. He had never faced anyone who made him feel so small. Not because she had power, but because she had a dignity he had never fully understood. Time passed slowly. The last rays of sunlight disappeared, replaced by the deep blue of dusk. The bedroom lights were on in the cabin, creating a quiet and cozy atmosphere. But, in Richard's mind, everything was a mess. He tried to focus on the entertainment screen in front of him, but the words kept blurring. He thought back to his youth, the years when he believed that winning meant losing. He had climbed to the top by trampling on the dignity of countless others. But now, in the sky, he realized something else. Power without respect is just an empty shell. Olivia closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax. She felt her heartbeat slow down, the fatigue giving way to serenity. Little did she know that beside her, Richard was going through a fierce internal battle. She said nothing, but her silence made Richard feel as if he were being scrutinized. He turned, looked at her again. She was calm, confident, and completely devoid of triumph. There was no contempt or hatred, just a calmness that made him feel small. For the first time, Richard Morgan asked himself, "Have I been wrong all this time?" The question caught him by the throat. It was simple, but painful. He had spent his life proving that he was strong, that he was worthy, but he had never stopped to think about how he made others feel. And now, in this luxurious first-class cabin, he felt emptier than ever. Outside the window, the plane passed through the clouds, the silver moonlight shining on the glittering wings. Olivia opened her eyes, looked at the scene, and sighed softly. She knew that life was full of unwanted confrontations, but each time was an opportunity for people to realize their true value. The first-class cabin was quiet now. Everyone was asleep, and the soft light fell on two people sitting side by side. Two worlds, two ways of life, two opposing sets of values, but between them, without a word, something was changing. Richard Morgan no longer saw Olivia as a challenge. He began to see her as a mirror reflecting the same arrogance he had carried. Olivia, on the other hand, doesn't hold grudges. She believes that sometimes people need a jolt like this to wake them up. And if today, this story makes someone think again, then all her efforts will have been worth it. The lights in the first-class cabin dimmed, reflecting on Richard Morgan's pensive face. The plane was still flying steadily above the clouds, the engine's sound as steady as the heartbeat of space. Most of the passengers were asleep. Only a few remained awake, staring at the screen in front of them, their minds somewhere far away. Olivia Harper remained seated, reading a few lines of news on her personal monitor. But then she noticed a gaze from beside her. Richard Morgan was looking at her, his gaze no longer challenging or arrogant as before, but hesitant, mixed with an indescribable shame. She raised her head, her voice soft. "Are you okay, Mr. Morgan?" Richard flinched, not expecting her to initiate conversation. He nodded, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I'm fine. Just a little tired from the long day." Olivia smiled. "I understand. Night flights always feel longer than usual." Richard was silent for a moment, then let out a long breath. "I apologize for earlier." His voice was low and hesitant, as if each word were a heavy stone dropping. Olivia was a little surprised, but said nothing. She just looked at him, waiting. "I behaved badly." "I know it," he said, looking out the window. "I don't know what made me lose control like that. Maybe it was habit. All my life I was used to people giving me space. I didn't realize I was becoming the person I hated." Olivia listened, not interrupting. His voice was low, carrying genuine regret. Inside, she felt her heart soften. "You know," she said after a few seconds of silence, "I used to get angry like you. When I was younger, I used to get mad when people disrespected me. But then I realized that anger doesn't make people respect you more. It just makes you lose yourself." Richard turned to look at her, his eyes lost in memories. "How do you stay so calm when someone insults you? Don't you want to fight back?" Olivia chuckled. "Yes, but I've learned that composure is the strongest form of resistance. When others expect you to lose control, and you maintain your composure, they've already lost." The words made Richard silent. He looked at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. He had thought strength was the ability to intimidate others. But now, looking at the woman before him, he realized he had misunderstood strength all his life. "Miss Harper," he said, "do you ever get tired having to prove yourself over and over again just because someone else thinks you're not worthy?" Olivia leaned back, her gaze fixed on the ceiling of the cabin, her voice low. "Yes, many times. There were times when I wanted to give up, but then I remembered how far I had come and how many others needed to see someone like me standing in this position. When they saw me, they knew they could do it too, and that kept me going." Richard nodded slowly. He felt something touch him, something he had long lost. He had once been ambitious, had wanted to change the world for the better, but over time, power had turned him cold. Olivia looked at him, her voice soft as a confession. You know, sometimes people aren't bad. They're just lost in their own false beliefs for too long. The words seemed to go straight to Richard's heart. He bowed his head and was silent for a long time. I thought I understood the world, he said softly, but it turns out I was living in a bubble. I thought I had power, but I was just isolating myself. Olivia listened, her voice softening. Understanding that is a good start. We all make mistakes. It's whether we dare to correct them or not. Richard smiled faintly, a tired smile. I never thought I would learn anything on a flight. I never thought the person teaching me would be the one I offended. Olivia smiled, her eyes warm. We all have a role in other people's stories, sometimes without realizing it. Maybe today, I can just be the one to remind you that respect still exists. And maybe you will tell this story to someone else. Richard nodded. He felt lighter. Something inside him began to change. Not shame, but a desire to make amends. They were silent for a few minutes, except for the steady hum of the engines. Outside, the moonlight still shone on the wings of the plane. Richard looked at Olivia, his voice hoarse. I am truly sorry, Miss Harper, not just for my actions today, but for representing the people who have made you and people like you suffer for so long. Olivia placed her hands on the table, her voice soft but full of emotion. I accept your apology, not because you deserve it, but because I believe anyone can change. Richard felt a lump in his throat. A wave of emotion washed over him, forcing him to turn away. Never in his life had he apologized so sincerely to anyone. At that moment, in the first-class cabin, there was no more CEO or investor, no more status or skin color. There were only two people talking like souls searching for their true value. As the plane began to enter light turbulence, the warning light came on. Olivia chuckled and said softly, Sometimes the sky reminds us that we can't control everything. Richard laughed, the softest, genuine laugh he'd had in years. For the first time in my life, I'm comfortable with not being in control. Olivia looked at him and nodded slightly. So, you're starting to change. The cabin speaker blared, announcing their approach to Los Angeles. Richard leaned back and looked out the window. He knew the flight would end soon, but what he had learned today would stay with him for the rest of his life. Olivia closed her eyes and exhaled softly, her heart at peace. She didn't need to win. Just one person changing would make the world a little better. The steady hum of the engines suddenly stopped, just for a moment, but enough to wake everyone. The lights in the cabin flickered and stabilized. Olivia Harper opened her eyes, glancing around. A strange feeling ran through her, like something was wrong. The captain's voice came through the loudspeaker, calm, but slightly serious. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just detected a technical alarm signal from the pressure system. The crew is working on it. Please remain calm. The first-class cabin was so quiet you could hear a heartbeat. A few passengers looked at each other nervously. Olivia rested her hands on her seat and looked at Richard Morgan. He had his eyes closed, trying to calm himself, but his hands were clenched. Emily Clark walked quickly through the aisle, her face professional but her eyes showing tension. Olivia noticed it immediately. She called softly, "Emily, what's wrong?" Emily paused, lowering her voice. "There's a minor problem in the engineering bay. Mrs. Harper. The captain is considering an emergency landing in Denver to check it's safe. Olivia nodded. She looked around, seeing faces starting to panic. A young man shook his wife's hand. An old woman whispered a prayer. She could feel the anxiety spreading. She knew that in moments like this, calm was more powerful than any command. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up gently. "Guys," she said, her voice calm, "the crew is well trained for situations like this. We will be safe. Please trust them." Her voice was not loud, but it echoed, spreading a strange sense of peace. A few people nodded. Richard Morgan opened his eyes and looked at her. He saw no fear in her eyes, only absolute trust and calm. There was a ding. The pressure warning light came on. Emily quickly went through the rows, checking seat belts and reassuring passengers. She whispered to Olivia, "The pilot decided to make an emergency landing. We'll be down in 15 minutes. Richard Morgan took a deep breath. "My God," he muttered. That 15 minutes seemed like a lifetime. Olivia turned, smiling slightly. "Sometimes 15 minutes can change a life. Mr. Morgan." The plane shook slightly. A metallic clang echoed through the cabin. Some passengers clutched the armrests, some sobbed silently. Olivia put her hand on the shoulder of a young girl trembling across the aisle. "Take a deep breath. Everything will be okay." The girl looked at her. Her eyes filled with tears. "Aren't you scared?" Olivia replied softly. "Yes, but I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but remaining calm in spite of it." Richard watched the scene. His heart suddenly ached. He could not believe that the woman he once despised was now the pillar of this entire cabin. Every word she spoke, every look she gave, calmed the people around her. He felt like he was witnessing a different kind of power, the power of trust and character. A stronger jolt shook the cabin. Screams rang out. Glasses of water spilled onto the floor. Wine splashed onto the seats. Olivia held on to the armrests, her head tilted slightly, her eyes still calm. Richard instinctively grabbed her hand, as if it were a natural reaction to seek out something to hold on to. They looked at each other. In that moment, there was no longer a CEO or an investor, just two people holding hands in an uncertain sky. Olivia squeezed his hand gently, her eyes calm. "It's okay. We'll be fine." The captain's voice rang out, this time a little more tense. "Prepare for an emergency landing. Everyone remain in your positions. Buckle your seat belts and keep your heads down." The wind outside was howling. The plane was shaking violently. Some passengers were screaming. Richard bowed his head as instructed, still holding Olivia's hand. He heard her say softly, almost in a whisper, "Take a deep breath. This will pass." In that moment, Richard realized something he had never understood his entire life. True power lies not in controlling others, but in remaining calm when the world around him falls apart. The plane descended, the screeching sound like a roar. Emily shouted, "Hold on, hold on," a loud bang. Everything went black, then silence. A few seconds later, the captain's voice rang out, mixed with heavy breathing. "We have landed safely in Denver. The crew will assist immediately." There was a wave of applause, shaky but full of emotion. A few people burst into tears. Emily rushed to check on the passengers. Olivia turned to Richard. He was still holding her hand, squeezing it so hard his knuckles turned white. She chuckled. "I told you. We're fine." Richard let out a small, shaky laugh. "I think you just saved my life. More than just my life. Olivia smiled, her eyes warm. "Perhaps you saved yourself, Mr. Morgan." The crew began to guide the passengers off the plane. Outside, the lights of Denver Airport were bright, and the rescue team was waiting. As Richard stepped out, the cold night air blew against his face, bringing with it a sense of relief and awakening. He paused at the door and turned to Olivia. "Miss Harper," he said softly, "thank you." "For teaching me something no school could ever teach," Olivia replied, her voice as soft as the night breeze. "Life is always the most valuable lesson." Richard nodded. "I won't forget this." Olivia looked at him, her eyes steady. "I believe so." She turned away, walking slowly down the metal staircase, the wind blowing her hair. Richard watched, a strange feeling rising in his heart. Respect, gratitude, and regret. He knew that from that moment on, his life would never be the same again. The night sky above was still vast and calm after the storm. The plane sat still on the runway, a symbol of the fragility and resilience of humanity. And among those hundreds of people, there was only one moment that everyone would remember, when a woman stood up, not with power or position, but with courage and character. A light rain fell on the Denver runway as the clock ticked toward midnight. The airport lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating endless streaks of light. The passengers were shaken from the crash landing, but safe, and in each eye, exhaustion was mixed with gratitude. Olivia Harper walked down the plane steps slowly, taking deep breaths of the cool air, her shoulders relaxing. The tension of the past few hours gradually melted away. The wind carried the smell of fuel, damp metal, and a sense of survival. She turned back, looking at the huge fuselage behind her, her heart filled with quiet emotion. Richard Morgan was still standing there, a few steps above. His eyes followed her figure in the dim light. Everything inside him seemed to have changed. The terror he had just experienced had stripped away any remaining layers of arrogance. Now he was just a middle-aged man standing in the night, trembling with the realization of something greater than himself. When Olivia stopped at the bottom of the stairs, he descended them. No one spoke. The sound of boots on metal echoed, punctuated by the patter of rain. When they were close together, Richard spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I never thought a flight could change me so much." Olivia looked at him, her eyes softening. "Sometimes life has to scare you just so you know how far you've gone astray." Richard nodded, his eyes tired but brighter. "You're right. I was lost. I lived too long in a world where people bowed to me. I thought it was respect, but it turned out to be fear." Olivia was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. "Fear may make people obey, but it does not make them trust. Do you know the difference between fear and respect?" Richard frowned. Listening, Olivia continued, her voice low and warm. "Fear makes people fake. Respect makes them real. A true leader doesn't need to force obedience. He just needs to make them believe they're worthy to walk with him." That statement took Richard by surprise. He looked at her, then bowed his head. "You may have just taught me the greatest lesson of my life." They walked slowly down the runway. The other passengers were being escorted to the waiting room by the staff. Emily Clark turned around and saw Olivia and Richard talking. She smiled slightly. In that moment, Emily realized that she had just witnessed not just an aviation accident, but a human awakening. Once in the waiting area, Richard and Olivia sat across from each other on the cold metal benches, Around them, people were calling loved ones, some crying with relief. No one paid any attention to the two of them. Richard looked at his hands, the golden light from the ceiling shining through the streaks of rain. He spoke slowly. "Miss Harper, I have never felt so small as I do tonight, but I think, for the first time, I really understand what it means to be great." Olivia smiled slightly. Sometimes we have to fall to realize we were standing on things that weren't real. He looked at her, smiling sadly. "I have hurt many people. Maybe I should start changing tomorrow morning." She tilted her head, her eyes warm and honest. "Why wait until tomorrow morning? Mr. Morgan, change begins the moment we face ourselves." Richard was silent. He nodded, and in that moment, he knew Olivia was right. Life didn't give many chances to start over, but tonight, he had been given that chance on a flight that almost never landed. A staff member came over and announced that the airline had arranged for a temporary rest room. Olivia thanked him and stood up. Richard followed. They walked side by side out of the waiting room. Their shoes echoed on the empty hallway floor. Before turning onto his own path, Richard paused. He pulled a business card from his pocket. "I don't know what else to say except thank you. If you ever need me for anything, just give me a call." Olivia took it, her eyes soft. "Thank you. But the best thing you can do is spread what you learned today." Richard looked at her, smiling. "I will. And I hope you know, you changed me, not with power, but with kindness." Olivia replied softly, "It is the only power I trust." She left, her figure blending into the yellow lights of the night airport. Richard stood watching until she disappeared around the corner. He walked slowly toward the glass door. Outside, the Skyward Airlines plane was still parked on the tarmac, its blue lights glinting in the rain. He stared at it for a long time, like he was looking at himself from the past, strong, confident, but empty. He sighed and took out his phone. For the first time in years, he called his daughter. When her soft voice reached him, he choked up. "Honey, I just want to say I love you. And I'm sorry if I ever scared you." On the other end, the girl's voice trembled. "Dad, I love you too." Tears rolled down Richard's cheeks. He sat down in his chair, feeling cleansed. The rain was still falling outside, but something inside him was coming to life. In the distance, Olivia walked through the security area. Her phone rang. It was her assistant. A familiar voice rang out, "Ms. Harper, all passengers are safe. The captain said that if it weren't for your calmness, the situation could have been chaotic." Olivia smiled, stepping through the glass doors. "No, it's not me. It's faith. When people believe in each other, they can overcome anything." She turned off the computer, stopped in the middle of the hall, and looked up at the dark sky. Above, the clouds had parted, revealing a pale silver moon. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air spread through her lungs, and then smiled slightly. The long day was over, but she knew that the real thing was now, just a day after Skyward 327 made an emergency landing in Denver. Images and videos of the first-class cabin flooded social media. At first, they were just a few short clips from passengers, Olivia Harper standing calmly amid the chaos, calming everyone down, or holding the hand of Richard Morgan, the man who had insulted her, to calm him through a panic attack. Within hours, from Twitter to TikTok, hashtags like "Yo Olivia Harper," "Courage in the Sky," and "Skyward Flight 327" exploded. Posts received millions of views and hundreds of thousands of shares. Comments were filled with emotion. She was so calm. I have never seen anyone so calm in the midst of danger. This is the power of dignity and kindness. This story makes me believe that there are still admirable leaders. News outlets quickly jumped on board. CNN, NBC, and even the New York Times all carried stories about the woman who turned a scary moment into a lesson in dignity and courage. They recounted the entire episode, the chair fight, the racist insults, and how Olivia kept her cool and handled the situation without getting angry. A famous social commentator shared on television, in a world full of shouting and conflict, Olivia Harper has proven that true power lies not in imposing, but in the ability to maintain dignity in adversity. At Skyward Airlines' New York office, the phones rang nonstop. The media staff was busy answering questions, while the customer service department was receiving thank you notes from passengers everywhere. Olivia remained silent. She did not appear on camera, did not answer the press. When asked, she simply said, "I just did the right thing." At the same time, Richard Morgan also became the center of public opinion, but in a different way. Videos recording his previous arrogant attitude quickly went viral, causing public outrage. Within hours, he lost a series of contracts, and business partners announced a temporary suspension of cooperation. Instead of reacting angrily as before, Richard chose to remain silent. He called his lawyer, not to defend himself, but to publicly apologize. A day later, a short video was posted on his personal page. In it, Richard Morgan sat in a small room, no fancy decorations, no suit, no stage lighting. He looked straight into the lens, his voice sincere. "I am Richard Morgan. I was wrong. I acted disrespectfully, not just to a woman, but to human dignity. If it weren't for Olivia Harper, I might not have realized how far I had strayed from the path of morality. I apologize to her, and I apologize to everyone I have ever disrespected. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." The video was shared millions of times in just a few hours. People were surprised by his transformation. A man once considered a symbol of arrogant power, now bowed his head and sincerely apologized. Public opinion turned from anger to emotion. They said, maybe people really can change. Back in Olivia's office on the 45th floor of Skyward, she sat staring at the screen where a series of news stories about her appeared. Emily Clark walked in, holding the morning paper. The front page showed a photo of Olivia in the middle of the plane's cabin, the dim light illuminating her calm face. The headline read, "The Woman Who Gave Hope to the Skies." Emily put the newspaper on the table and smiled. "The whole country is talking about you, Olivia." Olivia chuckled, "And they'll forget about it by next week. News is short, Emily. But if we really want something to change, and we have to turn today's feelings into tomorrow's actions." She stood up and looked out the window. The New York sky was blue, with clouds drifting lazily by. "I want the new training program to start now, not just for the crew, but for everyone. I want Skyward to be a place where everyone feels respected, no matter who they are." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. "You always see further than everyone else." Olivia smiled, but that calm light was still there in her eyes. "I just believe that if a story can spread, then a good value can spread even more strongly." The next day, Olivia was invited to appear on Good Morning America. She initially declined, but after thinking about it, she agreed, not to talk about herself, but to talk about the message. On live TV, the host asked Olivia, Do you feel like a hero? Olivia smiled. No, I'm just a normal person who chose to act differently. In that moment, I thought if I lost my temper, everyone would panic. But if I kept my cool, maybe someone else would too. And maybe that's how we save each other. Not by strength, but by faith. The studio audience fell silent, then stood up and applauded. Many were in tears. Millions watched the show that day on TV and social media. A Harvard leadership professor shared the interview with a short caption. Here's the leadership lesson I want to teach my students. Leadership is not about giving orders. Leadership is about others finding peace in your presence. Olivia Harper's story has become the subject of thousands of articles, speeches, and even soft skills classes. But Olivia did not want to be a symbol. That evening, when she returned to her small apartment, she made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the distant lights. The phone rang. It was Richard Morgan. His voice was soft but firm. Olivia, I just wanted to say thank you. I just started a scholarship fund for minority students. I was inspired by you. Olivia chuckled. I'm glad you did. Thanks for keeping your word. After the call, she put down the phone and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the sound of car horns mixed with the night wind. She whispered to herself, if just one person changes, then part of the world will change. The story of Olivia Harper is more than just a viral video. It has become a symbol of something simple, that calm, kindness, and respect can save the world. One person, one action, one flight at a time. Autumn in New York begins with crisp mornings. Skyward Airlines' glass buildings reflect the sunlight like giant mirrors, glittering against the sky. On the 45th floor, in the main conference room, Olivia Harper stands before a group of senior executives. On the screen behind her, large letters read, "The Skyward Reform, Building a Culture of Respect." The room was dead silent. All eyes were on Olivia, the woman the country had just learned about. But today she spoke not as an inspirational icon, but as a true leader. Her voice was soft but firm. I don't want Skyward to be remembered for a lucky accident. I want us to be the first airline where customers feel respected from the moment they board the plane. A human resources manager nodded. Ms. Harper, where would you like to start? Olivia looked around the room, her eyes lingering on each person, from within. We will retrain the entire flight crew, the airport staff, and the management team. Not just in technical procedures, but in people skills listening, empathizing, and responding in a crisis. She pressed the remote. The screen changed to the faces of the passengers on Flight 327 fear, panic, then calm. This isn't PR. This is why we exist. We get people where they need to go, but more importantly, we make them feel safe and respected. There was a round of applause. Emily Clark, now appointed head of corporate culture training, smiled proudly. After the meeting, Olivia walked down the glass corridor, looking down at the waking city. Below, hundreds of people were hurrying to work. She smiled slightly, grateful to be in the midst of it. That afternoon, she arrived at the newly built training center on Long Island. On the large wall hung a sign that read, "Every flight is a human story." Olivia stopped and stared at the words for a long time. In the training room, Emily is instructing the new crew. She talks about Flight 327 as a case study. Staying calm is not an instinct, it's a choice. And when you choose to stay calm, you choose to protect others. Olivia walked in, and the class stood up. She just smiled and gestured for them to sit down. "No need to be so serious," she said. "I'm not here to be honored. I'm here to learn." A young flight attendant asked her, "Mrs. Harper, when you were in the air, were you ever scared?" Olivia looked at him and nodded. "I was scared, but I trusted the people around me. And that's what I want you to feel when people trust each other. We're not scared anymore." The atmosphere in the class became warm. Everyone felt like they were touching something real, not a theoretical lesson, but a living experience. That evening, when Olivia returned to the office, she found an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, a rarity in the age of email. The man's handwriting was slightly shaky, Olivia. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. I just completed the paperwork to establish a scholarship fund called the Harper Foundation for Equal Opportunity. Each year, the fund will fund 100 minority students in aviation and leadership. I want them to have the opportunity to fly high, just like you taught me, Richard." Olivia sat silently, her eyes filling with tears. She placed the letter on the table, smiling slightly. He did it. The next day, Time magazine published a lengthy article headlined, "Olivia Harper, the woman who taught America how to lead with grace." In the article, the author wrote, "There was no podium, no slogan, just one woman standing in the midst of chaos and choosing kindness over anger. And from that moment on, she changed the way the country thought about power." But Olivia didn't get caught up in the limelight. She continued her work every day reviewing documents, meeting with the tech team, checking on training campaigns. She still arrived early, left late, and always kept a cup of coffee on her desk. One evening, Emily walked in and whispered, "Mrs. Harper, there's a boy who wants to see you. His mother was on Flight 327. He said he wanted to thank you." Olivia nodded. When the door opened, a boy about 10 years old walked in, holding a plastic model airplane. He looked at her with bright eyes. "I want to be a pilot when I grow up, like Miss Harper." Olivia bent down and smiled. "Then you must fly high, but remember, it is not the wings that make one fly, it is the heart." The boy nodded, hugged the gift, and gave it to her a small airplane model with the words, "Thank you for saving my mom," written on it. She took it, her heart warming. That night, when Olivia got home, she placed the model plane on a shelf by the window. Outside, New York was still bright. She stared at it for a long time, thinking about her journey from a small black girl once despised to a woman who made a nation listen with her composure. She whispered, as if talking to herself sometimes, "Just one right action in a difficult moment is enough to change everything." A week later, Skyward Airlines announced its Global Fly with Respect initiative. The airline became a new icon in the aviation industry, hailed as a model of humane corporate culture. When Olivia took the stage at the International Leadership Conference, she began her speech with the same words she had uttered in the airplane cabin that night. "We can't control the sky, but we can choose how we fly it." The audience was silent for a few seconds, then burst into applause. The San Francisco International Conference Hall was ablaze with lights. Hundreds of leaders, academics, and business people from around the world filled the seats. A large screen behind the stage projected the words, "The Global Leadership Forum, Leading with Humanity." Olivia Harper stepped onto the stage in a simple navy suit. Soft lighting illuminated her face, which radiated her trademark calm and confidence. As the applause died down, she smiled and spoke softly, just enough to silence the crowd. A few months ago, she began. I was just a passenger on a regular flight. But in just a few minutes, everything changed. One small action, one wrong word, and one unexpected incident made me realize that we never know how much we can affect someone else's life. A screen in the back lit up, showing Skyward 327 in the night sky, its emergency lights flashing. The room fell silent. Olivia continued. I didn't set out to be a hero that day. I just tried to stay calm, because I knew, if I let fear control me, it would spread throughout the cabin, and when fear spreads, reason disappears. She paused, looking at the audience with sincere eyes. But it wasn't that moment that changed me. It was the moment after, when a man who had hurt me looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm sorry." For the first time, I realized that compassion can do what power can never do. It makes people see each other. A wave of silence spread through the room. The host in the front row nodded slightly, as if she herself was moved. We live in a world, Olivia continued, where people can scream at each other with a tweet, where ego outweighs compassion. But I believe that if we want to change the world, we don't need to speak louder. We need to speak more truthfully. She paused. The screen cut to a picture of a smiling girl in a classroom, captioned Harper Foundation Scholarship Recipient. "This is Mia," she said. She lives in Chicago and was one of the first students to receive a scholarship from a foundation founded by Richard Morgan. He was the man who insulted me on the plane. Now, he is using that story to help others. That is why I believe it is never too late for anyone to change. A round of applause rang out, loud and genuine. Olivia bowed slightly, then smiled. But change doesn't start with a crowd. It starts with one person, the first person to do the right thing when everything is wrong. The first person to stay calm when the world is out of control. The first person to say sorry or forgive when no one asked. She looked out at the audience, her voice growing warmer and more intimate. So, I didn't come here today to talk about success. I came here to talk about choices. We can all choose how we lead, how we react, how we treat others. Each of those choices is a statement about who we are. She paused, bowing her head slightly, her voice low. When I was little, my mother used to say, "Olivia, you can't change the world if you can't keep your calm in the storm." And now I understand that keeping your calm isn't about standing still. It's about knowing when to act with your heart. In the front row, a middle-aged man quietly wiped away tears. A young female CEO clasped her hands and nodded. No one spoke, but in their eyes, Olivia saw an invisible connection, something she had always believed: kindness is the universal language of humanity. When the speech ended, the audience rose. The applause was long and loud, echoing throughout the glass room. Olivia smiled and bowed, but she wasn't thinking about fame. She was thinking about her mother, about that moment on the plane, and about the people who had taught her that the world could be a better place if we chose to live differently. After her speech, a group of reporters surrounded her. One asked, "Ms. Harper, what do you think made your speech resonate with so many people?" Olivia smiled. "Because I don't speak with my head, I speak with my heart, and everyone understands the heart." The answer was replayed millions of times on television and social media. The hashtag "Led with Heart" became a trend. Universities began incorporating Olivia's talk into their leadership curriculum. That evening, Olivia returned to her hotel. She took off her shoes and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights below. She checked her phone and saw thousands of messages from CEOs, teachers, students, and ordinary people. One read, "I saw your speech. I decided to apologize to someone I hurt. Thank you for making me believe in kindness." Olivia smiled. She put the phone down and closed her eyes. In her head, she heard the sound of the plane engine that night, the sound that had changed her life. The next morning, as she was preparing to leave San Francisco, Emily Clark called. "Olivia, did you know that Skyward has just been nominated for Airline of the Year? And there's more news. Richard Morgan himself has funded the Skyward for Students program. The whole team is thrilled." Olivia looked out the hotel window, where dawn was coloring the sky golden. She said softly, "Maybe. Sometimes it only takes a hard landing to learn how to take off again." Emily laughed over the phone. "That's worthy of being on the company wall." Olivia smiled, put on her coat, and left the room. Outside, the wind blew gently through the trees. She felt a sense of relief, not from the recognition, but from knowing that somewhere, someone was choosing to be a better person, simply because they had heard her story. As she stepped into the car, the morning light shone through the glass windows, reflecting on her face. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mom, I did it." A year after the Skyward 327 incident, spring has returned to the skies of New York. The city is still bustling and bright as if it had never slept. But in Olivia Harper's heart, everything has slowed down. Her days are now a series of meaningful moments, program meetings with Harper Foundation scholarship students, and thank you emails from around the world. Olivia was preparing to speak at a prestigious university in Manhattan that morning. As she stepped out of the Skyward building, the wind carried a faint scent of spring. The sky was blue, and the sun was shining softly on the street. She smiled. There was something in the air that felt different. The speech took place in a large auditorium where hundreds of students were waiting. When Olivia took the stage, there was thunderous applause. She spoke of courage, of respect, and of remaining calm in the storm. Her voice was soft and captivating. When the Q&A ended, a man stood up from the back row. He wore a light gray suit, was tall, and had silvery hair. Olivia stopped short when she saw him. It was Richard Morgan. The room fell silent as he took the podium. He took the microphone, looking at Olivia with a mixture of emotion and respect. "I don't mean to interrupt," he said, "but I think you should know. This woman didn't just save my life in the sky. She saved the best part of me." The audience burst into applause. Olivia smiled slightly and nodded. She walked up to him, and the two shook hands amid prolonged applause. After their talk, they left the school together. The wind blew gently through the trees, the leaves fallen here and there. Richard looked at Olivia and smiled. "It's been a year. You still have that calmness. I'm still learning how to have it," Olivia replied, her voice soft as a breath. "I'm still learning, Mr. Morgan, every day." They stopped at a small roadside cafe. The sunlight streamed through the glass windows, illuminating their faces. Richard looked around and said, "You know, since that day, I've never looked at the world the same. I used to think that money and power were power, but it turns out true power lies in how we treat each other." Olivia smiled. "And you use that power well. Your scholarship fund has helped so many people." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "No, Olivia, it's yours. I'm just doing what I should have done a long time ago." A moment of silence passed. Soft music played in the cafe, reminiscent of simpler times. Olivia looked out, her voice low. "Have you ever thought, if we hadn't met that day?" Richard laughed. "Yes. I might still be living in my own cage, believing I'm always right, and you might still be a great CEO, but the world will never know you as an icon." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with warmth. Sometimes God brings two people who are complete opposites together so they can learn to look at themselves. Richard nodded. "I think you're right." They were silent for a long moment. In that moment, neither of them spoke, but they both knew everything had changed forever since that flight. A moment later, Richard took a small envelope from his pocket. He placed it on the table. "I want you to see this." Inside is a photo of the Harper Foundation's first group of students, all smiling brightly under a banner that reads, "Dreams Take Flight." Olivia looked at the photos, her heart filled with emotion. "They are wonderful," she said softly. Richard nodded. "Every time I look at them, I remember that flight. I remember how calm you were. And I wonder, if it weren't for you, would I ever have seen these faces?" Olivia chuckled. "If you hadn't changed, would they have had this chance?" They both laughed. It was a soft laugh, but full of emotion. In the afternoon, they walked around a Central Park. The lake reflected the sunset, the sky tinged with a pale orange. "I read somewhere that you can forget everything in life except how someone made you feel," Richard said. Olivia smiled, replying slowly, "I believe that too, and today I feel at peace." He turned to look at her, smiling gently. "Thank you, Olivia, for not only saving me, but also helping me see that there is still good in the world." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "I only did what I believed was right, and perhaps the right thing we could ever do is forgive." They stopped on the cobblestone path where the last leaves of winter had fallen. The last rays of the sun shone on their faces. Two people, two different journeys, but united by the intersection of humanity. As they parted, Richard said, "If one day you fly again, and I am on that flight, I promise I will give you the first seat." Olivia laughed. "I hope it's a nice day and the skies are clear." Richard smiled and nodded. "With you on the plane, I believe so." They shook hands, a slow, sure, meaningful handshake. As Richard walked away, Olivia stood watching, the wind blowing through her hair. She knew this was not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new journey. The journey of two people who had learned that sometimes a chance encounter can change the world. The sky over New York was slowly turning a pale purple. Olivia looked up and saw a plane flying by. She whispered to herself, "Not everyone can change the world, but anyone can start by changing a heart." She walked among the crowd, blending into the rhythm of life. In her heart, she knew her story with Richard would be told forever, not because of the drama, but because it was proof that kindness could still prevail in a wounded world. On a calm summer morning, the sky above New York was as clear as a wash of rain. The glass facade of Skyward Airlines reflected the sunlight, shining like a symbol of new beginnings. Olivia Harper stood by the window on the 45th floor, a cup of coffee warm in her hand. Down on the street, people were moving, bustling but full of life. She smiled slightly, feeling a peace spreading in her chest, a feeling she had rarely experienced in her entire career as a leader. On the desk was a small card in a glass frame, an old boarding pass for Skyward Flight 327 Seat 1A. Next to it was a plastic model airplane that the boy had given her years ago, along with a photo of the Harper Foundation student team. Small objects, but containing the journey of a woman who chose to stand up, not with anger, but with forgiveness. That morning, Olivia was preparing to attend the one-year anniversary of the Fly with Respect program, the initiative she and the Skyward team launched after the incident last year. The program was held right at the headquarters, attracting hundreds of employees, press, and guests from all over. She adjusted her vest, looked in the mirror, and said to herself, "Today, I'm not just a CEO, I'm a storyteller of a journey of faith." As Olivia stepped onto the stage, she saw Emily Clark in the front row, along with familiar faces, flight attendants, engineers, office workers, and scholarship students. They applauded her arrival. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, with no longer any distance between leaders and employees, just people who believed in the same things: respect, kindness, and fairness. Olivia began to speak. "A year ago, I was on a flight none of us want to remember, but today I want to bring it up, not to bring pain, but to remind us that sometimes the hardest moments are where we find ourselves." Her voice was soft, but it rang clearly in the auditorium. "I learned that true power lies not in speaking louder than anyone else, but in listening more. Not in being right, but in daring to understand why others are wrong." Everyone fell silent. On the big screen behind them, images of Skyward staff training, taking care of customers, and smiling at passengers were projected. Moments of everyday life, but filled with emotion. Olivia continued, "We may build great planes, but what sets us apart is the hearts of the people who fly them. Every flight carries more than just passengers. It carries people's stories, dreams, and fears, and it's our job to make them feel seen and respected." The auditorium erupted in long applause. Emily looked at Olivia, her eyes brimming with tears. She knew this woman wasn't just talking about an airline, but about a way of life, a way of being. The ceremony ended in a moving atmosphere. Olivia then walked out onto the rooftop where she could see the entire skyline. The vast city was like a sea of light. She took a deep breath, feeling the warm breeze on her skin. Suddenly, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her smile. Richard Morgan. His voice was warm and calm. "I'm in Atlanta. Olivia. We've just opened a free flight training center for disadvantaged youth. It's named after you, Harper Flight Academy." Olivia was silent for a few seconds. Her voice trembled slightly. "You didn't have to." "I do," he interrupted, his voice sincere. "You taught me that sometimes an apology isn't enough. One has to take action to prove that one has changed." She smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Richard. I really am." "No," he said. "I'm proud to have met you. You have changed me, and in doing so, the world around me." The call ended in a warm silence. Olivia stood looking up at the sky. A plane passed by, leaving a trail of white smoke in the blue sky. In that moment, she felt like she saw herself again, the woman who had sat quietly in first class, faced scorn, and chosen to stand up with dignity. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving me the chance to learn to forgive." In the evening, Olivia returned home. Her small apartment in Brooklyn was simple but warm. On the shelf was a picture of her mother, smiling kindly. She poured a cup of tea, sat down on a chair, and opened an old notebook. On the last page, in neat handwriting, was written, "Success is not standing higher than others, but bending down and still maintaining kindness." She picked up the pen and wrote a new line below. And sometimes that kindness can make the world fly higher. A breeze blew in through the window, gently swaying the white curtains. The distant church bells rang, mingling with the sounds of the city. Olivia looked up at the sky and saw a star that was brighter than the others. She smiled, thinking, perhaps it was a blessing from Mother. Across the country, in Atlanta, Richard Morgan stood in front of a newly renovated building. The Harper Flight Academy sign reflected the setting sun. He placed his hand on his heart and said softly, "Thank you, Olivia." In that moment, two people from two different places looked up at the sky. Between them, there was no longer any boundary of skin color, status, or past. Only the empathy of souls who had learned to forgive, to love, and to start over. Their story has gone viral across the country. News outlets, schools, and businesses have cited Skyward and the Harper Foundation as examples of a culture of respect and humanity. But Olivia has always resisted the accolades. When asked why, she simply said, "I don't want people to remember my name. I want them to remember how it feels to be respected." And that is her greatest legacy. Years later, people still tell that story on flights about a black female CEO whose first-class seat was taken away. But instead of fighting back with anger, she chose to stay calm, and in doing so, changed a person, a company, and a generation. They called it the flight that changed the sky. But for Olivia Harper, it was just a day she chose love over resentment. She sat by the window, watching the plane drift away in the sunset, the pale light covering her gentle eyes. In that moment, she knew, no matter where, no matter what, as long as people still respected each other, this world still had hope, and somewhere in the open sky, the sound of an airplane engine echoed like a song of healing. Olivia Harper's story is more than just a journey of a female CEO facing discrimination on an airplane. It's an example of the power of calm, kindness, and healing in a world filled with prejudice. Olivia didn't win with power or a louder voice, she won with dignity, by choosing what was right when everything around her was wrong. The message of the story is clear. True power lies not in reacting quickly, but in choosing the right response. In life, we all have our own flights, moments of being challenged, of being slighted, of being hurt. How we deal with them defines us. Olivia teaches us that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of maturity. She chose kindness over hatred, and that is what made the world listen. If we can learn to stay calm in our own storms, then no matter how much prejudice there is out there, we can take flight on the wings of trust and kindness. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If Olivia Harper's story has touched your heart, please like and share this video to spread the power of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to discover more humane stories, where every journey is a lesson and every person is an inspiration.